Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show, episode number 43. How it's gone by. I'm Kenny Rice. Thank you for liking and subscribing to us on YouTube, listening on Google Play and iTunes, and 93.9 in Louisville. I love this guy. We've been great friends for a long time. Frank Cusumano, he has won multiple Emmy Awards. He has won Edward R. Murrow Awards. He is a sports journalist, the main anchor for KSDK TV in St. Louis, and a member of the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame. And he has covered horse racing. That is certainly not his main beat, and that's why I want to get his perspective today. Welcome in, Frank Cusumano.
Kenny, great to be with you. You're still my favorite person from the state of Kentucky.
Well, thank you. I moved ahead of Patino a few years ago, didn't I?
Yeah, after the little scandal, and you've lived a really clean Christian life, I had to put you on top.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. Well, now, we go way back to when you were working in Lexington, so you have been around the Kentucky Derby and Keeneland. You have covered some horse racing. But basically at KSDK, where you win all these awards, you know, you're covering the Cardinals and the Blues and when the Rams used to be in town. So as far as horse racing, how much attention does Frank Cusumano pay to horse racing every year?
Well, to be honest with you, we have a track here in St. Louis, which has been around for a long time, called Fairmont. And I am there, I'd say, about once a month for about a 4 or 5 month stretch. Uh-huh. It's an old track. It's got a great storied tradition. They have a former jockey, David Gall, who won 7,000 races, so he was always an easy story. And just in the last, I'd say month and a half, where Illinois has gotten great news about the ability to bet, that now there's going to be an infusion of cash into that racetrack where it's going to basically turn into a sports book. And it'll be great, and I think it'll improve the quality of racing, the quality of horses, and I think it'll put Fairmont maybe, a little bit back more in the sports picture here in St. Louis.
And so, I mean, there's horse racing fans in that great city of St. Louis and in Missouri, as we know. As you mentioned, from your perspective this year, Frank, seeing all the things that's happened at Santa Anita, this has been the bleakest year in so many ways for horse racing, the controversial finish at the Derby. Do you think this has just been such a year that's going to be tough for horse racing to come back overall in a national perspective?
Well, it's a tough call because it is, ironic that it got the most coverage, it has in a long time for the negativity of it or the scandal of it. I do think it's one of these sports, Kenny, where you have to experience it firsthand to really appreciate it. I mean, I have to tell you that in my 6 or 7 years in Lexington, some of the best, stories that I've covered and storytelling opportunities were at Churchill Downs Derby Week, or were at Keeneland when they had their racing seasons without the track announcer back in the really old days.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed it, and I think journalists appreciate it because you're around, we deal with pampered, spoiled brat professional athletes and general managers who don't want to tell you a thing. Let's face it, you know better than anybody, these jockeys and these trainers and some of these owners are characters who open up and tell great stories. I've always really just enjoyed the heck out of it. I just don't think, like in a market like St. Louis sometimes with these other sports, that, people gravitate to the sport unless there's a scandal. Now, I work at the NBC affiliate here in St. Louis. And
hey guys, I'm so sorry to jump in. I got to jump in here. I apologize. We were getting a bad feedback on your line. Hold on 1 second.
Sure, take your time.
Yeah, sorry, Frank. Frank, there's some kind of feedback coming in on your channel there. Are you near some? It sounds electrical. Do you hear it, Kenny?
Yeah, I was hearing a little bit.
I'm so sorry to do that, but it got so bad. It maxed us out. We may have to pull back on that last question, Kenny. We're still rolling.
Yeah, start that question over. No problem
and
at all.
Frank, you sound clear right now, so I don't know if
I'm in a different spot, and I'll try to stay in this spot.
Yeah, it sounds awesome now. Sorry about that again, fellas. And Kenny, just pull back to the question, and I'll do a fade.
Great.
Yeah. Frank, with this year being the problems at Santa Anita, well documented, even a controversial finish at the Kentucky Derby where I was waiting 22 minutes to see who the winner was. It's probably been it has been the bleakest year ever for horse racing. From a national standpoint, Do you think this is something horse racing bounces back from this time around?
I actually do. And I do think that in a weird way, you get a little bit of a jolt out of it because it was so attention grabbing and so unique that it caused people to pay attention. Now, you probably couldn't do this every year, but I got to believe with what happened last year during the Triple Crown season, there's going to be a buzz, heading into this year. So, yeah, I don't think it's going to be devastating. Kenny, as I've mentioned before with you, is some of the best storytelling opportunities I've ever had in my career were trackside at Churchill Downs Derby Week or at Keeneland, when the racing seasons were live. I just think that the characters, the openness of the trainers and the GMs and the jockeys are so much better than what we sometimes have in other professional sports. I think when people get a taste of it, especially the media, they love covering it.
And, you mentioned that, and you're a wonderful storyteller. That's why you win all those Emmys and those Edward R. Murrow Awards. And, with horse racing, as we've talked about before, not only the horse, but as we know, they got the trainer, the jockey, the owner, sometimes the groom, the breeder. There's several layers that you don't often find in other stories. You got a manager, a coach, and a player, and maybe a story or two along those lines, but you can get about 4 or 5 stories sometimes out of one horse.
Absolutely. I always thought the trainers were the equivalent of other people in professional sports. Like if D. Wayne Lucas was a basketball coach, he'd obviously be Bob Knight. Mm-hmm. If Nick Zito were a basketball coach, he'd probably be Rick Pitino. And these trainers were just so uninhibited and candid and just, really giving. It just made for great stories.
And about crossover in sports, we had Bill Parcells on, who is a horse owner. That's why he was on the show. Of course, your friend of mine, Eddie Olczyk, I work with him at NBC, hockey star and also a great handicapper. Eric Johnson is a guy that's in on the horses that he owns. The Vino Rosso connection that just won the Classic, the Breeders' Cup Classic. There's a hockey connection there with the Florida Panthers. So there's crossover with a lot of athletes that like horse racing, possibly because there's action. They like that action if they don't know a lot about the sport itself.
Yeah, that's a great point. In fact, we were joking with Eddie Olczyk when Joel Quenneville, who won 3 Stanley Cups with the Chicago Blackhawks, took the Florida job. And a lot of people thought it was because the track was so close to the rink. Mike Shannon, who's our legendary broadcaster, who's in his 80s, I mean, he will miss Cardinal broadcast on Derby Saturday, and he's at Fairmount all the time. Jay Randolph, who I interned for at Channel 5, he still works at Fairmount here in St. Louis, and he just is addicted to the horses, too.
Well, again, like you say, there's so many stories and so many characters, and characters in a good way. I mean, there's some very colorful dudes hanging around the racetrack.
You can say that again. There's no doubt about that.
It's like Damon Runyon still lives, Every week there's a Damon Runyon story at a racetrack.
With the exception of you, my all-time favorite reporter covering horse racing, this is a little bit before your time, was Nick from CNN.
Nick Charles, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, the late Nick Charles. And I used to just love to turn on CNN Sports Tonight, Derby Week, and, watch his verbs come alive on television. And, there was nobody any better Derby Week telling stories than Nick.
And that's true. And I miss him, and it was fun. That's how we developed a friendship, was crossing paths at the horse race track. We're talking with Frank Cusumano, the multiple award-winning sports anchor for KSDK TV in St. Louis, and a great friend and always has great insight about sports overall. We'll continue this conversation about the perception of horse racing on the scene today when we come back here on the Horse Racing Show. Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. Glad that you tuned in, and delighted to have Frank Cusumano, a dear friend of mine for many years. The main anchor at KSDK TV in St. Louis in the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame. You're the first Missouri Sports Hall of Famer we've had on the show, Frank.
Well, I think the year that they voted, we had Italian judges, so that kind of helped.
And speaking of, how about this for just an unsolicited plug? When you're in the St. Louis area, eat at Chemo's.
Well, we appreciate that. We've been at it for 93 years, and we still have my grandma's red sauce recipes, and we're doing the best we can.
And if you follow Frank as I do, he also is a foodie. He does this not just the sports thing, but he also goes around and tells you great places to eat.
Yeah, that's just a kind of a thing that I do to get free food, basically. So, but we enjoy the heck out of that. In fact, Kenny, I was at the Blues game the other night, and my wife Monique went to the restroom, and this woman comes to me and she says, "Oh, I know you. You're the food reviewer at Channel 5." And I said, "Okay, thanks."
Well, don't you love that when you make a mark like that after 20 plus
That's right.
years and all those awards on the sports desk?
Yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah, that happens to me sometimes. They'll come up to me at a major race and they'll say, "Hey, you still doing that MMA stuff?" I go, "Yeah." I go, "You do horse racing too?" I said, "Yeah, how about that?" I've been doing that a little longer. I've covered, the Derby and a few big races, but thanks for noticing.
That's funny.
Is there any kind of correlation? You covered Super Bowls, World Series, Stanley Cups, big NCAA tournament games, basketball. Is there any correlation between being at a big event like that and being at the Kentucky Derby?
The only event that I would equate to the Kentucky Derby would be the Indy 500.
Yeah.
Where in addition to the hardcore, passionate, knowledgeable, fans in that particular sport, you also have kind of the lunatic fringe that are just there to get drunk and flash up their shirts, on the infield. But yeah, I think the Derby would be the only one in terms of that size and magnitude and that varied of an audience.
Did you sit there and watch and watch and watch and wonder what the heck was going on at the Derby this year?
Oh my goodness. Was it 22 minutes? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I think actually somebody put a watch on it that it was officially 21 minutes and 57 seconds. I said it felt like 21 hours. I mean, just to wait and the rain's coming down. And I'm up there with Bill Mott, and he may or may not have won. And, down there, Nick Luck's down there with Jason Service, who may have won, looked like he'd won, but now may not have won. Yeah, so it was a long 21:57, Frank.
Yeah, there's never been a suspended sense of drama like that. I mean, in a World Series or an NFL, when they're getting a look at the replay, that'll last, 3-4 minutes max. But 22 minutes was amazing. And I'm always amazed at the way you, in this seemingly terrible torrential weather all the time, managed to navigate. I'm sure you've ruined some great shoes and slacks walking through that mud, but you don't miss a beat, and the rain is going, and you're just asking these cogent questions. I am so impressed.
You're very kind, my friend. I have to because I still need the work, Otherwise, I'd come visit you. We'd go eat at Chemo's and watch it on a big screen or something.
That's right.
But you know how it is. It's the moment, and you know how you get caught up in a moment, no matter what sports you're covering, and especially, it's something big. I've never covered a Super Bowl. I've covered a lot of Final Fours. I've covered an All-Star game, not a World Series. But when you're there, and it's something that's special, and you don't have to explain yourself. They say, "What, do you cover horse racing?" "Yeah." "Have you ever covered the Derby?" "Yes, I covered 30 some Derbies." Then, they establish, you don't have to explain what the Kentucky Derby is. So I guess maybe that's the kind of momentum that keeps all of us going through the snow and mud, and really the worst conditions I ever worked at are always Derby week.
Yeah, and I imagine, too, that there's got to be a moment, either right before or right afterwards, where you realize that you are actually talking to the United States. I mean, everybody watches the Derby. I mean, the ratings are still outstanding, no matter what you say about horse racing. Everybody watches the Derby. I don't get that feeling. We do local. I knew that everybody in St. Louis was watching our pregame coverage right before Game 7.
Right.
But it's a little different, one city as opposed to the entire country.
Well, that does cross my mind, and I talk to my family, and I talk to you. I think about people that I know, and that's who I look at that camera and talk to. I really do, because it is. And, this year the ratings actually gained after the Derby. I guess people were calling their friends saying, "Whatever's going on in Kentucky, we've never seen anything like it before. Tune in," because our ratings actually got better during that almost 22 minutes span of figuring things out.
Well, and there's no way you could turn it off. I mean, it was just, you're going to all of a sudden not know who won?
Yeah.
Oh, it was great television. It was great drama.
Well, we mentioned, I said, for all the attention horse racing has gotten this year, and most of it has been negative, very few positive things even with some great horses that we've had on the track this year. But at least they're getting attention, and maybe in the long run that might be a good thing, especially if they do like car racing's had to do, like the NFL's had to do with concussions. If they address it and become transparent and try to move forward and spin that positively, I think that's a hope for horse racing.
Absolutely. Yeah, they can turn it into a positive. I agree with you 100%.
And it may take you to do it. I think I think that more people they get from outside that are sports journalists like you that, don't cover horse racing very much, but have knowledge of it. I think that's why I wanted you on the show today, to get that kind of feedback, Frank, because I do think it's time to get out of the box for horse racing and start looking more outside inward, because it's an insular sport.
Well, I mean, let's face it. You win a presidential election by getting the non-hardcore, supporters. You get the casual Republican or the casual Democrat, and you get a TV rating with that same, oftentimes like at 5 o'clock, we'll try to do something that sports-wise where I think maybe a housewife cooking a meal could be moderately interested. I probably don't want to go too heavy on wins above replacement of a baseball player at 522,
Right.
I want to do maybe the female marathon runner, or maybe some, light feature on some courageous young athlete. So that's the way to go. And I think with horse racing, if you were to, reach out to the local markets and to get, some of these sportscasters, to experience it, I think they'd get bit pretty easily by the bug.
And I think you've just summed it up. Once again, here only on the Horse Racing Show have we solved the problems of horse racing. That's what I try to do each week, Frank.
That's good stuff.
Hey, I can't thank you enough, my friend, for being on, and we'll catch back up, maybe Derby time or before. And how the Blues going to do this year?
Well, they've won 7 in a row. 5 of the last 7 have been in overtime. They lead the Western Conference in points, and everybody was anticipating a Stanley Cup hangover, and the Blues have not cooperated. They have not skipped a beat from last year's Stanley Cup. So it's an awesome team to cover.
Well, listen, I've always enjoyed your coverage and love the way you tell a story, and we got to catch up again.
Kenny, honored to be on the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The award-winning journalist that is Frank Cusumano from KSDK TV in St. Louis. We'll have more on the Horse Racing Show right after this.